Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Plant Services webinar on asset management, sponsored by SIGA. I'm Tom Wilk, the Chief Editor of Plant Services, and I thank you for joining us today. To begin, let me explain how you can participate in today's presentation. First, if you have any technical difficulties during today's session, please put your question into the questions window, and our technical experts will assist you directly. We recommend disabling any pop-up blocking software or extensions in your browser, as these can cause issues with the webinar player. Additionally, we welcome your questions during today's event. Simply type your questions into the question window on the side of your screen and hit the submit button. Today's speaker will respond to questions one-on-one during a live Q&A session following the main presentation. If you'd like a copy of the presentation slides at any time during today's webinar, whether a live day or on demand, please click on the Event Resources tab on the side of your screen to download the presentation. Also available in that area is information on the SIGA Safe Passage Program for planning and scheduling and/or mobile maintenance. Finally, please be aware that today's session is being recorded and will be available on the Plant Services website within the next 24 hours. You'll be notified by email when the archive is available. Now I'd like to welcome Rober Hancock, who will speak on the topic of extracting new value from your legacy EAM systems. Robert has served in the enterprise asset management space for the last 15 years and currently serves as the Global VP of Sales for SIGA. He has consulted with customers all over the globe in helping organizations pursue their digital journey towards maintenance excellence. Robert, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
Thanks so much, and thanks everybody for joining us today. I just want to kind of start off with a bit of a story that I'm sure you guys are all hearing these days, right? You have a significant amount of assets that you have in play to help you produce materials or mine materials in the case of the picture you see here. And so you're constantly challenged by your leadership, by your investment community to figure out, how can I draw more value from this? How can I increase production without increasing cost of production? And so we know that people are struggling through these conversations. How do I do this in a more efficient and more effective path? And a lot of that is going to be around digital projects. And so as that pressure mounts for you to really maintain your assets more effectively and efficiently, you're probably doing like most other companies, and you're looking around at technology that is going to help you do that. So what we're going to talk about today is, as you look at these different technology opportunities, how do you evaluate those, and how do you prepare yourself to be effective and efficient in their delivery? I was at a conference just a few months ago, and one of the folks from Accenture said that somewhere around 60% of digital projects in the last 10 years have failed. And their definition of failed is that they came in at least 25% over budget or 25% late in their delivery timeline. And I would say actually it's probably higher than that. And so we have a lot of work that we can do as a community to help ourselves be more efficient and more effective to take advantage of these new technologies. So as you start to think about these areas of investment, the potential to help you increase your effectiveness in the plant environment, a lot of these buzzwords are coming up, right? How can I utilize artificial intelligence effectively to help me deliver better in my production environment? You've got automation, and that can be robotics, it can be machinery, it can be technology as well. And then also mobile solutions. How can I enable my people in the field to be more effective and more efficient at their job? As we start to look at these potential areas that can help us extract more value from our assets and from our EAM environment, I want to talk about three particular areas that we might need to consider and might need to plan against, and really talk about what those challenges might be and how you might be able to overcome them. The three that we're going to talk about today are data challenges, what I call the lowest common denominator, and I'll share that with you in a few minutes what that means, and user adoption. So we're going to go through these one by one and talk about them and see where we might end up. The first one we want to talk about actually is going to be user adoption. So I want to tell you a bit of a story before we get into that topic. I had an opportunity to visit a shingle manufacturer in North Carolina a few months ago. In this particular case, they were looking at adopting a planning and scheduling solution for their maintenance planning. But we talked to some of their technicians and we learned that they had a mobile solution that was in place. One of our counterparts had been at one of the other sites and learned the same thing from them, that they had a mobile solution in place. So we asked them some questions about that mobile solution. And what we found out was that, quite frankly, they'd had that mobile solution deployed for about 6 months, but they were not using it really at all. Their leadership thought they were using it. The plant management itself didn't know, really wasn't paying that much attention. But I took out some of the technicians to lunch and they confessed to me that they basically were doing their confirmations at the end of the day. And I asked them why, and they had some technical issues and some other things. But what I gleaned from that conversation was simply that somebody showed up one day and said, here's your mobile device, and here's this mobile solution, here's the training, we expect you to use it. And so they felt like it was dropped on them at the last moment and very ill-prepared. And so quite frankly, they just decided not to use it. As I dug into it a little more, they didn't really seek out any additional questions or any additional help. They just basically said, no, we're not going to use it. And they didn't. And so that can be one of the results in not thinking about user adoption when you deploy new technologies in these environments. So let's talk about that a little bit. If you think about the change curve, and this is not new, and I'm sure you guys are familiar with this, but this is the typical curve that people go through when you provide them with a new technology, right? They start with a shock and they're very surprised. They deny it. They say it won't work. They express frustration because they're being forced to use it, but they don't want to do it. Then they kind of get depressed because they don't want to change, but they know they need to. On the other side of this curve, they begin to change. They start to experiment. They start to try the solution out a little more. They then get into a decision, okay, I'm going to use this, and then finally they're integrated. Our goal with trying to leverage these new technologies is not necessarily to get rid of that first half of the curve, but to compress that part of the curve down to a very short cycle and perhaps get rid of it completely if we can get to these users in the right way to compel them. So what are some ways that we might be able to kind of compress that left side of the change curve? So we can kind of look at some ideas here. How do we overcome the challenges of user adoption? So the first of those is early user engagement. I had the opportunity to visit with a petrochemical plant down in Louisiana about 2 weeks ago, and they're very early in their process. And what I loved about it is that those people knew more in the room, the plant personnel, the technicians themselves, they knew more about the project than I did as the vendor that they'd asked to come visit. And that's refreshing because a lot of times you walk in those rooms and there aren't any plant personnel in the room. So get those users engaged at an early state, advertise that you're thinking about these things, collect feedback from them, and then socialize those solutions, right? Share with them that you have these things you're looking to do. You want to educate them on the process. You want to gather feedback. Now, in many cases, you might want to also include them with vendor engagements, right? As you're looking and doing demos early, pick a pilot group of people that are going to be users and involve them heavily in the process. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to do exactly what they say, but having them be in the room and be a part of the process is going to really help you in being able to ensure that you have good user adoption for whatever these technologies are that you're hoping to deploy in the plant. You should also think about a personal ROI matrix. And that is, how can you map what these people want, what they need, to the solution's benefits? How can you connect those dots so that these personnel who are going to be expected to deploy these solutions and potentially use them can personally benefit from their execution? In some ways, that may be a long-term ROI benefit that says, hey, our company is looking to invest more in our people, but in order to free up the capital to do that, we have to run our business more efficiently. Finally, you might consider specific incentive programs. In the case of one of our customers, they actually had these jackets developed, really quite nice jackets, actually. I think they came from Land's End or one of those others. And it actually had a really pretty logo on the back of it. And so every time one of those people got certified on the new technology, meaning they had been trained on the technology and they'd proved proficiency, they received one of those jackets. Now, it may not seem like much, but it actually just those little things that you can do to encourage those folks to be a part of the solution and not just be a negative impact on its success. So those are some ideas about user engagement and user adoption. And so let's move on now and talk about the next challenge area, and that is lowest common denominator. So I want to talk about this a little bit and give you guys some framework that you may or may not be accustomed to. And I want to start with another customer story. One of our customers, named Man and Hummel, who manufacture filters, deployed a mobile solution for their maintenance technicians in the plant. They made a determination early in the process that they were going to start with a pilot plant that was very near their corporate headquarters, or at least theoretically near their corporate headquarters, in that it had a high level of IT investment. They had been a good adopter of new technology solutions in the past, and it's shown really a proclivity towards absorbing new technologies. So they rolled out the solution to that plant. Later, it was rolled out to a smaller plant in North Carolina. I had the opportunity to visit that plant, and one of the things that they were trying to get those folks to do, for those of you who in the SAP world understand that when there's a problem in the plant with a piece of equipment, everything starts in the SAP world with something called a notification. So the people on the line, if they notice, say, a hydraulic leak or something is down, they're expected to create an SAP notification, which then goes to the maintenance staff. They determine if they want to create a work order and go fix that. In this particular plant, they were using radios and sticky notes to pass on their notification. So we went to visit that plant and found that the production personnel were still not doing it. They had the mobile solution deployed. We had an opportunity to meet with some of those production personnel, and we opened up their user interface, and we found that it was asking a lot of questions of them that were unnecessary. In that particular plant, the maintenance personnel only needed to know what the asset was and what kind of problem it was having. They didn't expect you to take a picture of anything. They didn't need any other information. And so they were asking of these people more than what they were willing and used to providing. So they simply didn't do it. So these are the kind of challenges you need to think about. So let's talk about what this lowest common denominator approach means. So if you're talking about deploying a new technology solution into a plant environment, and certainly if you have more than one plant, we have a tendency to think that all of these plants behave the same way. And the reality is it just doesn't work that way. You have different types of materials that are being used. You have different types of personnel that are working in the plant. They're building or producing different types of assets. Some of them may be union shops and others may not. So the reality is these plants tend to be very different from one another, even though they may not look that way. And so what people tend to do are really the two extremes. On the left-hand side, they choose a pilot plant that's very mature, that has good process already, and they deploy the solution there as their first step. The challenge with that is if you try and roll that solution out to a, call it lesser able or lesser mature plant, you're expecting them to not only adopt a new technology, but also adopt new and more mature process at the same time. And this is a recipe for failure. We warn our customers and our prospects all the time about doing both of those things at the same time. It's not that it can't be done, but it actually needs to be measured and specifically planned that you're doing both of those things at once. And you have to take that whole change curve into account that we talked about earlier. So you can go the other way, meaning you can look at what's called the lowest common denominator, meaning I only expect the basics of this, right? So I'm going to go to that plant that doesn't have good technology resources, that is not used to rolling out new technology, and I'm going to build my proof of concept or my first rollout against their requirement. The challenge is that may work well for them, but that other mature plant that we were just talking about, now you're asking them to downgrade their process and downgrade their experience. And so both of those may tend to be a loser. So let's talk about some ways that you can help yourselves in moving these solutions out into the market. So there are two key ways that we can do that. And there are obviously others that we can talk about as well. The first of those is to group your sites. In the case of one of our customers, we saw them group them by the material they produced. So in this particular customer, they made a little different thing in different plants. And so said, okay, and let's take it, for example, in the agricultural industry, you might have an area that is responsible for grain and another for dairy, right? And so these things are going to be more like one another than, for example, a grain and a dairy location are going to be similar. So what we'd advise you to do is to at least consider grouping those sites so that you can apply the solutions uniquely for those groups, really. You might also consider grouping them by maturity, right? So you might have acquired a company and maybe they've just rolled into your new ERP solution. And so you might want to group those together separately from your plants that maybe have been in existence for 10, 15, 30 years. The second of those, as you deploy solutions for technology in these plants, and where possible, is that you consider using a low or no code solution to deploy that, and that you enable personnel within those plant environments to have the ability to adjust those solutions on their own. So I'm going to give you an example from one of our customers that I just mentioned, Man and Hummel. In that particular plant in North Carolina, where they weren't using the notification app, we were able to go into the solution and actually rip off 2/3 of the workflow in about 30 minutes, save that app, redeploy it out to the production personnel so that within that same day, that production personnel were able to get the app that they could use, that they understood, that mapped the workflow and the performance that they're accustomed to. You can somewhat do the same thing for low code, but that's going to require you to actually have a developer or somebody who at least understands low code solutions. The no code can be done by maintenance personnel. So these are the types of technologies that you can leverage to help you be more flexible when it comes to the uniqueness of your plants or even within the plants of your users. In some of our customers, we actually see a different user experience for non-maintenance personnel, a different solution that's in maintenance folks' hands, and also even a different user experience within the same plant with different lines that are producing different materials and have different processes. So these are some ways that you can help avoid and overcome the lowest common denominator approach. So let's move on now, and let's talk about the third challenge, the data challenge. So we're going to talk about that. Some of those challenges are insufficient data, unclean data, and disorganized data. So I want to talk about this a little bit let's talk about artificial intelligence. So setting the politics of it aside, I just want to give you an example from the current zeitgeist that you might be familiar with. Within about an hour and a half of our former president, we thought somebody had shot at him. I went to ChatGPT and I asked it what happened. And it quite frankly didn't know. At one point, it gave me an answer that seemed to indicate that no, nothing really happened. I looked again about 15 or 20 minutes later, and it gave me a little more information. And then finally, 3 to 4 hours later, it was able to articulate to me that the incident had happened and some more of the details. The reason is that it just wasn't enough data for it to consume. These technologies, whether it's automation solutions or artificial intelligence, et cetera, they rely on good, structured, clean, organized data, and there needs to be a wealth of it in order for you to make a decision. I'm going to give you a specific example of this from an oil and gas plant in South Africa. So we had a project that we're doing years ago when I was with another company, where we were trying to help them understand how to make their maintenance process more efficient and more effective. So we were looking at a lot of their different process and data streams, et cetera. And one of the topics that came up was we need to understand why 60% of the time when we schedule a piece of work to be done, it is not done when we scheduled it, right? And so we began to look at the underlying data, and one of those was what was called in their SAP system a failure code. So when a technician would go out to do a piece of work and they were not able to complete that, so they either paused the work order or they created a new work order, et cetera, they had to put a reason that happened. So when we ran an extract of that data and put it in a spreadsheet, there were over 1,000 reasons that people were not finishing on time. I actually took that data back to my hotel room that night and I began to do some sorting and searching on it. And what I found was about 80% of the time, the word part existed in those failure codes. Now, when I went back to the underlying place inside their ERP system where they put that, it turns out they were allowed to free text that reason. So I could put ice cream in there if I wanted to, or ribeye steak. It didn't matter. I could create a code. That's how they ended up with 1,000 data elements. So as we ran the numbers, what we found is that the big reason why they were not able to complete jobs is the parts were not available to them for whatever reason, right? Either the part wasn't there at all, or they didn't get the part planned beforehand, et cetera. So we begin to see that these data sources have to be really efficient, effective, clean, and organized in order to be successful. So what are some of the things that one can do in order to help you leverage these new technologies? So we'll go to the next slide. And so I'm going to talk about a couple of these in specific. So the first of those, the bottom right, is requirements gathering for new projects. We find even with some of our own customers, when we go to do implementations, that they really have not done a data requirement process where they say, in order for me to leverage these new technologies, what are the places that I need to gather data from? What data is going to be leveraged, and how is it going to be leveraged in order for us to get this outcome that we're looking at, right? In this case, and the one that I used in South Africa, right, that they wanted to build a dashboard that basically told them what they were doing wrong. Well, we can't give you a dashboard that has 1,000 data elements in it because it's not going to mean anything to you. So the second thing you'd want to do is once you've gathered those requirements, you want to analyze that data. So it's the one I mentioned before, where we went into their ERP system and we pulled out all those reasons code. You need to do some analysis or use a tool to help you do some analysis to understand the depth of the data, the health of the data, the structure of the data, the availability of the data, right? Now, after you understand that and you might understand what your problems are, you need to go through and do some cleansing. So in this situation that we mentioned earlier about the company in South Africa, what we ended up doing was taking all of those work orders that were not completed for a parts reason, and we changed those in their ERP system to just the word parts, right? So those data elements, thousands of them, were automatically changed so that then in the dashboard, you begin, okay, what's the reason we're not finishing jobs? Well, you saw 78% of them were parts. Now, obviously, over time, you might want to dig into that a little further, and you might want to decide to create some breakdowns of that. So that's where you have to start adjusting your data capture requirements. So in this case, we had a group of people in the room where we said, okay, what are the real reasons why you might not finish a job? And it came down to really about 5 reasons. One of those was parts. The other was called for an emergent job, ran out of time. There was all these other issues. Within the parts, we then created a subset. Okay, part was not available, part was not planned. They had to break that down so that now, okay, let's look at our parts and say, okay, is this that we're not ordering things correctly, or stocking system's not working well, or we can't locate the part, or we're not doing a good job to plan? Again, all of this starts with building your requirements, doing the analysis, cleansing the data, and then adjusting your data capture requirements going forward. These are all the things that are going to help you, or some of the things that are going to help lead you to a more positive outcome to help you actually move forward with your EAM environment with new technology investments. So I'd like to just introduce you a little bit about us while I have you here, and I apologize for the shameless selling. So just so you understand who SIGA is actually founded about 24 years ago, and we focus exclusively on the SAP plant maintenance environment. We have about 220 employees and over 100,000 active users of our mobile work order maintenance solution, as well as our work order planning and scheduling solution, again, exclusively and uniquely used for SAP. We've been doing this a long time, and so we've had 24 years of experience in helping people move their technology footprint forward and digitize more and more of their solutions. And these are many of the problems that we've uncovered as we've been doing that. And we hope that this message has helped you to at least think and plan about being successful with these going forward. So thank you guys for taking a little bit of time for me today, and I'm going to turn it back over for any questions that you guys might have.
All right. Thank you very much, Robert. I appreciate that presentation. And at this point, we'll tackle some of the questions that have come in from attendees. For anybody who does have questions for Robert on this presentation, go ahead and type those questions into the question window on the side of your screen, the question box, and we'll take as many as we can in the time we have remaining available today. So, Robert, the first one focuses on some terms that you used early in the presentation, no code and low code. Could you talk a little bit about what the difference is between no-code solutions versus low-code solutions?
Yeah, so in the last 10 years, the citizen developer environment has kind of come up, right? So there are a lot of different platforms out there that are, they have some building blocks of function that are already built. And then you go and you write a little code and you put those building blocks in the place that you want them to go, right? So that's really what low code is. I don't have to write a lot of code, but I still have to write some code. No code is actually something somebody like I can do. I'm perfectly capable of going into a no code solution. You see that in a lot of your website applications anymore, where you can kind of go build a personal website, et cetera. So that means these components are fully built out, and you're able to go move things around and design a UI that uses these elements. You typically find that low-code solutions are solutions that are coming from a general market environment, right? Like you might go buy a low-code solution from Microsoft. But Microsoft's not going to understand necessarily what a work order is, right? Then you have no-code solutions like we have, right? Where we're not thinking about HR and we're not thinking about other solutions. We're only thinking about SAP plant maintenance. So we're able to build a much deeper set of functions that allows you to configure and move those around and make it your own. And so that's really the major difference between low and no code.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I saw a lot of interest at this year's INTS show in low code and no code solutions. So I think it's starting to gain some popular traction in the market.
Well, I think if you go back, if you go back to the scenario we talked about the lowest common denominator and being able to build user experiences that are unique for them, that is the easiest way to do it, right? That you have a person at a plant or for a group of plants that's responsible for configuring the user interface. So for example, you might deploy a mobile maintenance solution to a plant, and you have a guy that comes up and say, we have this safety form that we're having to fill out before we do every work order. It would be really great if that were in the app. Well, a no-code solution, that guy could just go in his office, put the form in the mobile app, hit save, and it's ready to go, right? So those are some of the advantages, to be able to respond to users very quickly and to be able to provide unique user experiences for each one.
Excellent. We got a question that came in about data cleansing. And the question is, how deep does data cleanse have to be in order to really leverage things like artificial intelligence?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say that people they need to have their blinders open, right? They need to understand what the world looks like. And they should probably start small and not start giant, right? So if I were going to use artificial intelligence, say in my home, to help me understand how to automate some things, I might just start with the air conditioner, right? I might say, okay, I'm going to train this artificial intelligence to understand what levels of comfort I like in my home, and when I need the air to be cooler, and when I'm okay with it being warmer, when I go to sleep at night so that it can actually reduce it, et cetera. I'm not going to try and feed it information about when we cook and when it needs to start the grill and when it should run our sprinklers versus when the rain comes. I'm going to start with one thing. And you need to, when you're doing that analysis, so I need to have enough data so that the outcome can be predictable. So for example, I can't just use data in my home for the last 2 weeks to help the solution understand how to keep my house cold or warm. My mother and father-in-law were here for the last 2 days, and they like it warmer, so it's been a little warmer here for me. And so I'm going to need enough data so that the solution has enough of a runway to really understand, okay, I understand now, on the average Sunday, Robert really likes to come home and have a cool house after church. Or on the average Tuesday, my wife comes home from work at 4 and she likes it to be a little warmer. So you need to have enough. And I know that's not an empirical number, but it just needs to be enough, and it needs to be small enough so that you can do a good job.
It speaks to what you spoke earlier too, that every site is unique. And so you only know what enough is when you run some experiments or do some trials about this, right?
Yeah, an example that we used earlier where we were talking about parts from that company in South Africa, we looked back for a year. It's how far back we went to understand what it was, right? So we knew we needed to go back far enough that we got a shutdown. So they do a yearly shutdown during the summer for a whole month. In this particular location, every crane, every welder, basically every contractor in the country is in this one town in South Africa during this 1 month. So we knew that amount of data was just immense. We had to at least capture that, but we also wanted normal data, meaning we wanted outside of the shutdown, we wanted that too. So we decided to go back a year and do it as well. And before that, it just didn't matter, right? It's like, okay, this gives me enough to understand how to move forward. I don't need to go back 5 years because I'm not looking at that data anymore.
Okay. Now, we got a really good question that came in about balancing the 3 different priorities, which you spoke of today, between culture and lowest common denominator and data. And I'll read the question straight up here. It says, when do you think that moving to a mobile EAM technology or solution is absolutely necessary? And the question continues, especially when your existing EAM or CMMS has a lot of data quality issues, from asset management to asset inventory. So this person's asking, how do you navigate when you know it's time to move? And does that depend in part on the quality of your existing data in your EAM CMMS?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things to think about there. First of all, it's kind of a chicken and the egg conversation, right? Why do I have bad data? Now, what we found in the places where we've deployed our solutions, it is because of paper, right? So there's a lot of challenges that paper creates. What we see things are not getting turned in at all, meaning there's a lack of data because I produce work and I have a work order, but I don't do anything. I don't capture materials. I don't write things down. The second is, by using paper, you allow people to write things out of their own mind. So we talked about that parts issue earlier, right? If I have a paper work order and I don't finish a job because the part was not planned, and then when I found out I needed it, I couldn't get it out of stock, am I really going to write all that down on a work order? Or am I just going to say it didn't work and put the word part down, right? So I would tell you that a lot of the reasons why people have data is because of these issues that paper involves. And so deploying a mobile solution can help you clean that up, only for the fact that, number one, they are kind of forced to put the data in so you can control it, right? If I don't do a job, I have to hit stop. And when I hit stop, it asks me, why am I stopping? Are you stopping because you completed the work order or because you didn't, right? And so I'm going to be forced to create good data. So what we found with mobile is when it's deployed effectively and efficiently, it actually creates better data. and it creates it in a uniformed and efficient fashion. So I'm biased in this. I would tell you that mobile is probably something you'd want to do fast. Planning and scheduling tools can be a little bit different, right? Because in order to plan and schedule in a digital format, I need the data. I need to know what, I want to plan this job for Jim to do on Monday. I need to be able to see what our parts and inventory is for that part, because he's got to have that part, and where is it and where can he get it? Now, that's really more of a access to data than it is bad data, et cetera. But you do need to have some of these processes in place. They can be done at the same time, and it's usually easier to do it with scheduling, but you definitely need to take that into account as you deploy it.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really fair and grounded in real life answer about how to tackle these things. I'm really intrigued that mobile, as you say, can improve the data in the system. It strikes me that can solve two problems at once: culture and data.
Yeah, you do tend to see that. I mean, obviously, you're going to have people that have kind of older workforces that are maybe sometimes challenged, but I don't see. I'm 50. I think I'm 52 now, right? I don't see too many people around that don't have their iPhone, either looking at Facebook or Twitter or whatever their thing is, right? So people are used to that anyway. The issue you got to get past, quite frankly, is the technicians who like carrying a wrench and they like handing a work order to either their manager or or secretary type role. I apologize for using that word, and say, here, you go deal with this, right? That's a laziness factor, and that's a little bit harder to get past, at least until you take that person away and you say, well, there is nobody for you to hand a work order into that's going to go put it in your ERP system. So either you're going to have to sit down and do it yourself, or just do it while you're standing at the machine.
Interesting. Sorry, you got me thinking about what happens when real culture change happens. Job descriptions change and people move around. So again, like when you said remove that person's probably doing something different now. So, and change happens gradually, but for real.
Listen, I grew up on a farm, and we had a guy who really loved this old tractor we had, and kept trying to get him to change it. He had worked for my grandfather. He worked for my dad. I think he worked for him back when they, maybe when using plows behind horses, right? So this is an older guy, right? And we're buying this new tractor, and the tractor had GPS in it and all these other things. And he just got in it one day. It was like, I'm not going to do that. And so my dad went to him and said, well, maybe it's time for you to retire, right? Like that's some of the tough decision making you have to make sometimes.
Right. Well, we got one more teed up, and that'll take us to the end of the session today, Robert. And it's a good one. This person wants to know, when it comes to starting to engage on potential projects, how early do you think people should start getting engaged?
My advice is as early as possible, and as early without creating disruption or bad expectations. And so let me walk you through that a little bit. So I just got a boat for the first time in my life, right? And so I'd been thinking about getting a boat for a while. My wife and I just moved down here near Clemson, South Carolina on a lake, which is where we're going to retire at. And so I'd been thinking about that boat a long time. I did not take my wife to look at boats until 2 weeks ago, because it wasn't until 2 weeks ago that I had definitely made a decision budgetarily that we were going to get a boat, right? If I'd have taken my wife 6 months ago, we might have spent a lot of time talking about it. Perhaps she might have gotten excited about it, and then we didn't buy it. Or maybe she would tell our kids, hey, we're buying a boat. And then my kids are aggravated because they thought they could come down during the summer and ski or whatever it is, right? So you don't want to tell them at a time where it's going to cause upset. But you do want to tell them as early as possible so they can, first and foremost, all of these issues that we're talking about, right, in gathering good data and preparing yourself effectively, these people on the ground probably know a lot more about it than you do, right? So I'll use an exact situation. So that organization that deployed mobile at that shingle plant in North Carolina, they didn't tell these people. So that means the people were also not involved in the decisions about what type of technology to buy or how it would work. Now, one of the things that we found out from those folks is that they don't have really the greatest Wi-Fi in that plant. It's not bad. It's just not great.
Mm-hmm.
So every time they would open up the mobile app, it would take 1.5 minutes to 2.5 minutes for it to sync with their ERP system, right? There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it was poorly architected. The solution should only be syncing changes and not syncing the whole database, right? So these are all feedback we gave to management and said, hey, we've looked at this, you have a problem. So not only did you not culturally involve them and upset them, but you also didn't get their feedback to understand, listen, if it takes me 1.5 minutes to 2.5 minutes to log in every time, and I'm only doing 2 or 3 work orders a day, that means I have to do this every time, I'm not going to use it. Right? So these are all opportunities that if they'd have engaged these users and said, hey, maybe try this out. You know, I mentioned that petrochemical plant we were at down a few weeks ago. They actually, you know, we gave them all, I wish I had one. We handed out iPad minis in the room, and they actually had a workflow of theirs to go through and test, and they timed it and everything else, right? These are good ways that you can learn not just to buy a functionally capable solution, but ones that your user will embrace and implement successfully.
Excellent. Well, and you remind me the next generation is going to expect even better connections. I have 3 kids in middle school, and boy, if their video games lag even a half second, we hear about it right away.
Oh, I'm the same way. I mean, I have this, you guys could probably tell, I have this great computer system here, right, with 3 monitors and my computer's down here, et cetera. But I can do my job, almost 100% of it, sitting on the couch with my phone. I don't need any of this, right? And that's the world we're moving to, and I think people have to get ready for it.
Oh. Well, with that, Robert, we're about at time, so I want to thank you for being here today and sharing your expertise with all of us. Thanks, Robert.
Thanks. And if anybody has a question, please reach out. And I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Same here. And I'll have one last reminder that if you want a copy of Robert's presentation slides, you can click on the event resources on the side of your screen to download that presentation. And also available in that section is a flyer on the SIGA Safe Passage Program for planning and scheduling and mobile maintenance.
So just to give you a little hint about that, we have a program right now that if you have an existing planning, scheduling, or mobility solution and you're not happy with it, we can convert you to ours at 50% of the cost with no transition fees. So those are just a little bit of a shameless promotion.
No, that's good. I'd encourage everyone to download the flyer. I read it earlier, Robert, and it explains a lot about the program. So excellent. And one last thing, we encourage everyone to take the brief exit survey that will appear on your screen shortly to provide feedback that we can use to improve future events. So thanks again, Robert. Thanks to SIGA for sponsoring today's webinar, and thanks to everyone for attending. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.